Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing fine, thank you very much. And all the better because you've joined me today. And I've got a fabulous story for you that you're just going to love. Now, if you've listened to part 1, this is part 2. And if you haven't listened to part 1, I do strongly recommend you go back to it because you don't want to miss the entire story. There's nothing in this world that beats a good story, and this is a very good one. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. People's voices become almost disembodied and faint as the wind roars to a frenzy, charging against the marquee like a tsunami of feisty ocean waves, crashing violently against the rocks with an irate angriness that cannot be suppressed or controlled. This is one hell of a storm, and granted I knew that the weather was expected to be partly cloudy and overcast, but this I did not expect. We've had storms on the Oregon coast 100 times before, and windy conditions naturally go with the territory here. But a wind like this, even I have never encountered. It leaves a bodeful feeling clinging to my guts, like the bottom feeders in a fish tank. I feel as if my insides are gnawing inside of me. I hate not being in control. I'm supposed to be managing the evening, making sure the lights should have come back on by now. But they have failed us. Everything has failed us tonight. It is hard to feel that this storm is not personal, as if the storm itself has reserved its wrath for us. When the bride booked my venue, she told me trouble followed her wherever she went. She believed she attracted adverse circumstances to her like bees to a honeypot. I'm beginning to think she might be right. I don't want anything to go wrong with my wedding, she told me. At my last wedding we were caught up in a cyclone. And then my other wedding, the venue was completely flooded. I remember thinking, bloody hell, how many weddings have you had, young lady? At a guess, I'd say she looked 25 years old, certainly no more, and was going down the aisle a third time without even batting an eyelid. Should she not be a teensy-weensy concerned about that? Obviously not. If she continued this way, she might actually have more weddings behind her than I've had hot dinners. I bit my lip. I didn't say anything, but if the boot were on the other foot, I would almost certainly have taken my time getting married for the third time in a row. If I had 2 failed weddings behind me, that is. Are people not supposed to be wary after making mistakes? It doesn't seem so. Some people keep diving into the deep end with the sharks, hoping that this time they miraculously won't get bitten. For me, I adhere to the wizened old saying, once burnt, twice shy. I mean, I've been a wedding venue coordinator for many years now, before I actually inherited the Georgian house on the hill that I had converted into a wedding venue. I've seen things in my line of work that will automatically make your hair curl. I've been running our wedding venue for over 4 years now. Fairweather Heights. Are you kidding me? There's nothing fair about the weather tonight that has conspired against us. What induced me to call my venue that name? There really is nothing fair about the weather here. When the bride hinted at trouble following her wherever she went, I'm beginning to think she's not wrong. I'm seized with regret that I accepted her business, for this treacherous storm is most certainly not for the faint-hearted. It would be so easy to run to the white Georgian house on the hill 300 feet away from the tent tonight. But this is impossible. Leaving the marquee could be a precarious risk. The wind could literally fling you over the cliff face to your death. And tonight it could do just that, especially as everything is pitch black out there. You can't see a thing. It is safer to stay in the marquee until the storm dies. But this is a wedding I would sooner forget. I think I'm not alone in these thoughts. How I would like to be safely tucked behind the high walls of the Georgian mansion. But although so painfully close, it's extensively too far away to brave the elements, to get back to the safe security of the house. Some fierce and baleful storms you just don't mess with, this being one of them. This cautionary storm is like a grumpy, cantankerous man. who's far too big for his boots, is almost certainly hell-bent on getting his own way this evening, peritonaciously determined to be the absolute centre of attention, like a miserable, somewhat highly opinionated wedding guest at a dinner table that you're just going to have to endure all night long, come hell or high water, whether you actually like it or not. I pull out the torch that I carry in my pocket as a matter of regular habit. I gasp in an obsequious horror, for as the wind whips around the tent, howling, moaning, whistling, wailing, screaming, lamenting, and roaring, my torchlight focuses on the red velvet cake that the bride had ordered. Oh my goodness, it's beginning to heave and groan, as if it too has had quite enough of this storm. The sumptuously decadent, delicious, exclusive cake cost an arm and a leg, and the bride didn't flinch at the cost, not even for a second. Its 4 magnificent rounded layers, white perfect frosting, masterfully detailed sugar flowers covering a bright, rich red sponge. But even as I watch the cake, it's cracking. It bursts open. It explodes, collapsing all over the marquee, tumbling on the ground, breaking apart. It looks like a bloody congealed mess. The white looks like human skin and flesh. The red looks ominously like blood. If you didn't know better, you'd think someone had been murdered. Then the worst thing happens. A woman's deadly scream rings out as she catches a glimpse of the cake from the light of my torch. I didn't want her to see that. I know exactly what it looks like. She's got the complete wrong end of the stick. This is all I need. A hysterical woman on my watch. The woman lets out a disembodied scream that roars through the tent and is only accentuated by the whipping sounds of the wind ferociously punching the tent. Someone's been murdered! Someone's been murdered! There's a dead body over there! There's blood everywhere! Someone's been murdered! There is a hush, followed by sobs and cries from frightened people, who cradle in the darkness, clinging to each other for support. Calm down, everyone, I shout. There's nothing to worry about. Please stay calm. No one's been murdered tonight. Unfortunately, the wind caused the red velvet wedding cake to burst open, and I'm afraid it does look like a bloody mess. Relieved laughs ring around the tent at this revelation, but the notes of anxiety can be discerned in their voices. Can't someone bloody put a light on somewhere? Said a man's voice. It's freaking us out in here. The weather is doing our nuts. Look, everyone, the weather I can do nothing about. None of us can leave the confines of this tent. I want to make that very clear. I'm ordering each and every one of you not to leave. I'm afraid to say the cliffs and rocky outcrops are treacherous out here, especially on a tenebrous night like this. If anyone dares to try go back to the Georgian house in this weather, you are quite simply dicing with death, and I'm not sure you will survive. Even in lesser conditions, people have been swept to their deaths by a feisty wind current out here. And as for the lights, I certainly don't fancy our chances of them coming back on tonight. I think the electric circuits have blown. We're all just going to have to sit through the storm, and we're just going to have to build ourselves up, because quite honestly, there's nothing else we can do. We can only be positive and pray that the storm will finally die. But this marquee feels as if it's folding in on us, screams a man. We could be blown away in this tent. I know, but I think it'll contain us safely, and as bad as the weather sounds out there, and whether we like it or not, remaining in the tent is quite frankly our only and safest option. Some wedding this is turning out to be, comes a man's voice. Every time I've been to one of Victoria's weddings, it's a complete nightmare. But this is a bloody disaster. I know, I'm sorry, but we just have to stay here. It's too risky for us to try to go back to the Georgian house. All of a sudden I feel a tap on my shoulders. I hear the familiar voice of the groom speaking to me. I'm so glad I found you, he says in a troubled voice. It's so bloody black in here. I can't see a thing. I'm exceedingly worried about my wife, Victoria. She slipped out of the marquee a couple of minutes ago. I tried to stop her, but she pushed me away. She was going back to the mansion. This time my face drains of all colour. My heart sinks. But why would she do that? The storm out there is treacherous. It's perilous. She could be blown over the cliffs to her death. Are you kidding me? Why did she go back in the first place? Why did you not stop her? This is crazy. She was going to get a couple of torches. I did try to stop her, as I was telling you, but she ran out of the tent before I could. All of a sudden a woman's scream can be heard, coming from outside of the tent a fair way away. A terrifying scream. It courses through my veins, for it is hauntingly airy. It's the kind of murderous scream you expect to hear when someone is wrestling with death, or, not to put too fine a point on it, actually being brutally killed. I know in my heart it is the bride. The energy in the tent has gone quiet, very subdued. No one has said a single word, not even the most stoic among us, as terror has incapacitated the entire crowd, and every heart has surrendered to her powerful hold. I am responsible for this bride. She's in my charge. I can't leave her to the mercy of the elements. I just can't. Not on my watch. So I clandestinely creep out of the tent. I know it's extremely foolish. I won't listen to my own wise counsel, but I have to find her. I can't have another death on my conscience. One was bad enough, and that almost tore me apart. I made sure no one saw me creep out of the tent, as I slipped out with a stealth that was very, very convincing, like a ghost in the night, fading into the shadows, merging with it, becoming one with the cut-out shapes of the landscape. The last thing I want is to unsteady the guests' nerves, as it seems I'm the only reasoning voice of calm in the rising chaos of the wedding. I have perceived some of the guests who have unwillingly surrendered to their fate with a stoic bravery, others unusually silent, while some are sobbing silently, almost ashamed of their tears. There's nothing to be ashamed of about being afraid of a storm like this. I don't know what to feel. Me personally, I'm just very calm. I think all are hoping and praying the marquee will remain above their heads, but seriously doubting it will, as this wind tonight is viciously assaulting everything, and even the wedding cutlery is flying off the tables, so many people are huddling under the tables to avoid getting hit. I can smell real fear in that tent tonight, and when my torch flickered over the sea of earnest faces, I knew people were clinging to hope. They will come out of this ordeal alive. But the weather promises nothing, keeps you guessing. I've asked my husband to keep a watch over things for a moment, but I never even mentioned for a second that I would be sneaking out of the tent like this. I imagine such a move would result in my husband, a man normally reasonably composed, to have kittens. Of course I know I'm dicing with death, adopting this nonsensical manoeuvre that will more than likely kill me. But there are some things you have to do, despite the risks, like trying to get into a burning building to rescue someone. It's in the trying that really counts, and that's what I'm doing now. I'm trying. It doesn't mean there's going to be a successful outcome here, far from it, but it's in the trying that I can at least live with myself, by admitting I did everything possible to save the bride's life. My heart is sinking. I have graphic visions in my mind, going back a year ago, when the weather was a lot milder than this, a whole lot milder. One of my guests at a wedding party decided to go for a skinny dip in the middle of the ocean, while the guests partied the night away, obliviously unaware that one of the party had been swept out to sea by a gruesome, less than accommodating wind current. The following morning I went down to the beach for a morning stroll, sinking my feet into the deliciously soft sea sand, enjoying the blissful, energizing feel of the early morning shafts of sunlight, hugging me with an invigorating warmth. My husband was back at the house, in the throes of preparing a wedding breakfast for the remaining guests, where champagne and orange juice were being served, and salmon bagels with cream cheese, a delicious cooked English breakfast, and French pâtisserie. I will never forget the horror when I came upon a grisly sight, washed up on the beach like a dead Portuguese man of war. I found myself staring down at the dead white naked body of a man, lying tangled and twisted in the seaweed. At first I thought he had to be a mannequin, but as I looked more closely and poked him with a stick to see if he was real, I discovered he was dead, only to find out later he was one of the missing wedding guests, a good friend of the groom's. Pandemonium broke out on the beach when the groom found his good friend lying there dead. There was wailing and weeping, and let's just say a buoyant wedding weekend ended up seriously punctured, and the final guests left my wedding venue feeling exceedingly flat. I just don't want a repeat of that disaster all over again. It took me a long time to recover from that event. You never forget something like that. It stays with you. It sinks into your DNA, becomes one with who you are. Over the months I've told wedding couples a story, hoping that the precautionary tale will sober and subdue some of their choices here, while staying, in the Georgian farmhouse. But I've learnt one thing about human beings as a venue coordinator, and that is that they live with the false presumptuousness that it's never ever going to happen to them. People can be willfully ignorant, self-deceiving, believing what they want to believe, seeing what they want to see. As I embrace the elements, I try to abandon the thoughts of our dead guest from over a year ago, but the memory is so hauntingly visual and hard to shift on a night like this, like a pendulum swinging brazenly to the forefront of my mind, inviting me to re-energize those memories all over again. Please, no. I really don't want to remember all that. It's funny, when you're facing a hostile, grim, life-threatening situation, the thoughts of death are never far from your mind, but I can't entertain them now. Not now. It will weaken my resolve, intimidate my courage, and I need to do this. I really need to do this. I need to find the bride. The hostile, malevolent wind is brutal. It doesn't take fools gladly, of which I hasten to say the bride is clearly one of them, and I am possibly about to join her there in this regard. I mean, what on earth induced an intelligent woman like her to go out in the middle of a storm like this? It's incongruous, irrational behaviour that is inviting disaster as the guest of honour to join you on your wedding. I mean, I've never seen anything like this storm before. I hope never to again. The wind is violently tearing at my clothes. My black skirt that I'm wearing is flung up against my face. My hair is tossed out of its ponytail and is flying all over my head in wavy wisps. My whole body is swaggering around like an inebriated drunk. I'm hanging on for dear life onto anything that can support my weight. I know what I'm doing is completely ridiculous. This is insane. But I just can't sit back and do nothing. I just can't. The blustering, unflagging wind jostles me with cruel, dogged shoves, like an abusive, aggressive partner. I manage to crawl on my hands and knees, clinging to the grass with all my might, with the light of my torch guiding the way, on my hands and knees. I seem to have greater stability, I find, in manoeuvring myself across the turf, like an oversized, wiggling worm. The dark has joined forces with the wind tonight. Two powerful aggressors determined to wreak their vengeance on the wedding guests, as if someone in our party has stored up a plethora of bad karma for themselves. The karma is now acting out into our reality, and we're all on the receiving end of it. It would seem that the moon is an evanescent guest in the sky tonight, rather than a familiar good old friend, as she has decided to abandon the bad company of the cantankerous wind, and who can blame her for that? She is barely visible tonight. The glittering stars that always accompany her seem indeterminate, as if they had burrowed beneath the sky to conceal their glittering faces. The sky seems to have become dense, cloying, thick, while the wind whips, howls, screams in her disdainful belligerence. I am not discouraged. I have to find the bride. Where is she? I crawl with a fast speediness, as quickly as I possibly can, clawing at the ground with my nails and hands. But then in a moment, the wind sweeps me up in a pair of bullishly commanding hands, as if I'm as light as a feather. I wrestle against her tirelessly, but it's a losing battle, one that I will not win. She carries me far away from the marquee and drops me down on the ground. I found myself dangling over a precarious rocky ledge that is about 70 feet away from the Georgian house. But let's just say 70 feet is like an island away in a storm like this. And if I don't hold onto this rock for dear life, I could go sliding to the bottom of this cliff face to my death. I realise my own vulnerability, but I steady myself carefully, with one hand very firmly embedded on the rock, and another with the light of my torch, which miraculously, against all odds, was not blown away. My torchlight casts its flickering beams across the beach and the ocean. Then I hear a scream. Shivers begin to claw down my spine. The light of my torch can see a body, bobbing up and down in the capricious ocean waves. It's the bride. Oh my God, it's the bride! I watch in bated breath, my hopes dashed, as the courageous young woman is wrestling with the feverishly choppy waves that are fighting back, sweeping her further and further and further out to sea. This is a losing battle. It's impossible to win. My heart sinks. The bride is not going to make it to shore. There is no way I can help her. I'm clinging to these rocks myself for dear life, like a barnacle, feeling hopelessly defeated, as I know trying to save the bride will only result in my own imminent demise. For if I rose to my feet, even if I was very cautious about it, I would almost certainly be thrown off the slippery cliff. The wind's impetuous hands would literally have no mercy on me, and I would find myself joining the bride in the frantically turbulent, acquiescent current. Then there would be 2 deceased bodies washed to shore in the morning, submerged in seaweed. One of them will be mine. The woman is shrieking. Her voice is high-pitched, echoing across the ocean like a foghorn on a ghost ship, as everything tonight has an outer-worldly ambience about it. The bride is not giving up, without a fight. She's got spunk and tenacity. I'll certainly give her that. She's clinging on to hope with all her might, even when hope has spurned her and dismissed her cries. The light of my torch discerns something else. What is that? What on earth is that? At first it seems like a great big blob of black. Then a giant, dark, vertical humanoid figure appears quite suddenly, like a flash of light, through the foggy haze. And whoever he is, or she, it's not intimidated or browbeaten by this storm, not affected by its whipping current in the slightest, for it would take much more to subdue a creature of such statuesque proportions that, rather like a redwood tree, can stand up indomitably, stoically against nature's wrath. This dark, ambiguous silhouette moves stealthily through the wind like an untroubled, robust army vehicle that can overcome anything without any trouble, that can drive through any life-threatening situation. With a nonchalant air of longanimous indifference, the unflappable creature is gracefully, literally floating towards the sounds of the woman's frantic screams. As I watch in confounded astonishment at what is unfolding before my very eyes, I'm rather reminded of the movie Chariots of Fire. The phenomenal music soundtrack when Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell raced for gold in 1924 Olympics, as there's such a purposeful grace in the creature's stride and the way he both coordinates his arms and leg movements together. It is musical to watch. But what the heck is this creature? I notice the shape of the head pivots to a conspicuous, rather pronounced point. The shoulders are massive, and the graceful, thick, heavily muscular legs seem to float, while his cushioned, large feet glide through the soft beach sand, leaving behind a long vertical trail of deep impressions, the feet of a giant. Then this huge gargantuan being, whatever in God's name he actually is, dives into the water, swimming towards the terrified woman. And when he reaches her side, she seems to almost fight back, as she grips onto him for dear life, and would be dragging him under the water in her panic, if he wasn't so gargantuan, both in girth, weight, and strength. The creature holds the bride very gently in his overlong, powerful arms, with a rigid, resolute, very powerful strength, and then with a fluent grace, adroit dexterity, complemented by a smooth, fluid elegance, he freewheels his Herculean-sized body through the choppy waves that bite against his long, flowing, dark, silky hair to the shoreline. He's using sweeping movements to anchor himself through the water as he swims, rather reminding me of a great fish. He's a natural in the water. The angry, uncompromising, unyielding waves, magnified furthermore by the feisty wind, attack the two bodies in defiance, like soldiers fighting a losing battle, knowing they've been defeated by the enemy. But even so they refuse to give up their vicious assault, as the flogging wind bangs against them. The powerful, strong, lofty creature swims to the shoreline like a swimming champion, with an effortless ease against a tumultuous, strapping current that knows no mercy, or magnanimous consideration for that matter. The creature's dark hair is now soaked to the skin, water clinging to his body like wet hair on a shaggy dog's coat, where cracks of grey skin beneath the dense finery of his silken black hair reveal the sculptural definitions of a muscle tone that most men would aspire to have on a wish list, that's for sure. Soon he is standing on the beach, like a tall, vertical, imposing tree, with the figure of the bride almost passed out from sheer exhaustion, cradled in his arms. Her head is swept right back. The tousles of her long hair cling to her head in ringlets, while her drenched wedding dress, what is left of it, that is all but a limp, rather glamorous shirt, clinging modestly to her upper torso. As I cling to the rocks, I'm flooded by relief. The bride has been rescued. But I'm astonished and befuddled by this enigmatic, idiosyncratic creature. What on earth is it? I focus the light of my torch on the creature more carefully, who, like a knight in shining armour, has delivered the bride from a watery grave. It is then the head of the creature looks directly up at me. Clinging to the rocks he can see that I am, and his yellow eyes meet mine. It is then that recognition flows through my body, as the pages of my mind go flashing back to a programme I'd watched on television an age ago, called Finding Bigfoot, I believe it was. I'm now flooded with an immense shame, as I had no respect for any people on that programme, apart from the red-headed woman Renee, who handled every Bigfoot encounter with a healthy scepticism and scant regard. I had laughed at these people, thinking they were grossly naive to believe in such preposterous imaginings, but now it hits me like a brick to the head. I was the naive one among them, not them. Oh my God, this creature is definitely a Bigfoot. There is no doubt about this in my mind. He's watching me with his wide golden eyes, and the eloquent, crisp words, "I'm coming to get you in a moment," enter my head. "Stay there, young girl. Don't you dare move. Not safe." What the heck? I think, befuddled. Did that creature actually just talk to me? There's no doubt he did. Is he coming to get me too? Oh, I hope so, for right now as the wind attacks me, it's punnelling through my clothes, it's leathering me with a birch-like whip of vicious lashes. I can take no more, for an exhaustion has consumed me. The energy has been evacuated from me, drained away like water from a sink. And more than anything else, I want to loosen my grip, let go, relax, give up. But if I do, even for a brief second, I'll be vanquished by this wind that will wallop me against the rocks, ambushing me from every side. So I will be flung into her powerful arms, tossed into the ocean, swept out to sea, and drowned under the waves, only to become a year later another mannequin-like body, lying on a sandy beach, tangled up in seaweed, vomited out by the sea herself at high tide. I'll possibly be found by a couple of 10-year-old boys, I imagine, who'll poke my body with a piece of birch to check if I'm made of flesh or plastic, if I'm alive or dead. At first they will squirm, with a disgusted, revulsed inquisitiveness that must be investigated, as that what little boys do all the time, do they not? At that impressionable young age, investigate, prospect, forage, winnow, rummage, explore. Ostensibly, upon realizing I'm a corpse, they will stare at each other in abject horror, with eyes growing as wide as saucers. Then, remembering their voices, they will scream at the top of their lungs as they race back home, crumbling beneath their exhausted little legs to tell their parents about what a gruesome, horrifying, unsightly form they found regurgitated by the ocean, washed up this morning. People will gather around my body in droves, as if studying some strange idiosyncratic fish washed up to shore, a mermaid perhaps, with legs instead of fins. They'll toss and shake their wary heads,
Well, what was she thinking? They'll say to each other. Why would a young, intelligent woman like this, with her whole life ahead of her, dice with death so recklessly? Everyone knows the weather last night was ruthlessly avenging, and yet despite this, she embraced it like a wise and old friend. What was she thinking? Had she lost leave of her senses? Was she inebriated? Intoxicated? High on drugs, perhaps? Or positively insane, maybe? Worse still, was she of sober mind? And still did this? The latter would be very difficult to digest or assimilate. It would be easier to assume that this irrational, daredevil behaviour was a result of a drunken insanity. I mean, she was asking for trouble, was she not? Almost begging for the spirit of death to steal her away to pastures green that undulate in the clouds of the heavenlies above us.
I can almost hear the pity in their voices, as if they can't decide whether to pity my blind ignorance, incredulous naivety, brazen foolishness, or just a dreadful spate of an inauspicious, serendipitous bad luck. Like me, those boys won't ever forget, even with the passing years. The memory of my deceased body will haunt their darkest nightmares, torment their waking moments, and flickering memories that burn on the wicks of their imaginations, becoming one with their DNA, for they will absorb the horror of what they've seen, like a beverage that soon becomes consumed by the cells of our body, and becomes part of us, as anything we imbibe naturally does. My mind is encouraging me to keep positive, to hold on a little longer, just a little longer, just a little longer. I give myself a stern pep talk, reminding myself of what I have to live for, about my beautiful husband, the special people that I love in my life, my mother and dad, my sister. I think about the movie scene I've just created in my mind. Do I really want that scenario to unfold? Absolutely not. I'm reminded of the Bigfoot's words that sang into my head like a joyful church bell. Well, were they just hopeful ramblings of an overactive imagination on my part, and not a voice from him at all? Even if it was my mind teasing me and conjuring up words that were not my own to encourage me to hold on for a little longer, one thing I do know, that Bigfoot definitely saw me. If he rescued the bride, delivering her from harm's way, will he not do the same for me too? Surely he knows I'm not clinging to the rocks for my own pleasure. No one would be out here in the storm for the sheer fun of it. Would they? Never. Every guest in that marquee is cowering. Grown men are shrinking into the shadows of that canvas, ashamed of their own terror, coming to grips with their own mortality, like people on an aeroplane on realizing that the plane is going to crash in minutes. The Bigfoot knows I'm in perilous danger, for the ferociousness of this cruel wind is unrelenting in its spiteful tenacity. I owe it to myself, and to all those I love, to get through this tempestuous ordeal. But I need to calm the storm of my doubt that is brewing in my mind, which by the looks of things is even more treacherous than this physical storm that is outside of me. The only thing that can let me down right now is myself. I close my eyes tightly, screaming out to God for his compassion and mercy, negotiating with him a plethora of promises that I do intend to keep. I promise you I intend to keep them. God, I'll be more loving, I cry out in my mind. I'll be a kinder person, much more patient, more tolerant, less judgmental. I'll go to church every Sunday. I promise you I will. I will read the Bible much more. I will confess my sins more regularly, of which I know that there are many. I'll buy my nephew the remote-control plane he asked for last Christmas that I refused him so ungraciously. I'll take my mother out more often to the nail salon for a manicure, followed by a relaxing Thai massage. Then I will spoil her with a touch of shopping. I promise you I will. I'll buy her the dress she pointed out to me in the shop window more recently, that I pretended not to see, because of its blazing $1,000 price tag that very nearly gave me a coronary on the spot. I won't be jealous of my sister any more for being so much better at playing cards than me. I hate how she's always so damned good at cards and wins every single time.
And she looks thrilled about it too. But God, next time she wins, instead of inwardly scowling, while wearing a fake smile on my sister's behalf, in the guise that I'm pleased for her, when inwardly I'm actually squirming, as I bite my inside cheek and pretend all is well with the world. I'll genuinely try to be happy for her, God. I really will. I will. I'll hug her with delight, admit she's a pro, compliment her lavishly for her undisputable skill. And you know, God, that's exceedingly hard for me to have to do. And when my sister taunts me by telling me her husband is whisking her to Paris for a 3-week holiday yet again, I mean, how many times does she have to go to Paris? Oh, and why does her wealthy husband whisk her all over the globe to all these exciting exotic locations, as his wealth is literally dripping out of his sweat? I'm stuck here at the Oregon coast. Not that I'm complaining, God. I love it here. But I will try and be happy for her. You see, God, I'm grateful just to be here, alive in one piece, with a new morning to hopefully embrace. I promise you, God, I'll try my level best to defeat my battles with the green-eyed monster, of which there are many that I need to overcome. Oh, they're a perpetual struggle, I admit they are. As I cling to the rock face, with my sweating fingers almost losing their grip, as the rock, like a perfidious skating rink, is now becoming increasingly slippery, like an eel. Its glassy, lubricated surface is wheedling my fingers to slide precariously all over the place, making me all too well aware that if I let go, I'm not going to make it. I know I'll slip down the slope like a children's slide, with the blustering persuasions of the backstabbing gale-force winds that will doubtless vindictively throw me into the mutinous waters, to be prescriptively reprimanded by the acrimonious authority and chastisement of the ocean waves themselves. My negotiation with God steps up a notch or two, becoming so much more intense. God, you need me, I cry out in my mind. You definitely need me, God. I try to conjure up a list of reasons why someone omnipotent like God could possibly need me. I can't think of any good reasons, but I'm going to have to think fast and quick. Why does God need me? Believe me, I'm thinking hard and fast. I've got no time to lose. Time is of the essence. Now is the time to hard sell myself to God like never before. I'll stop at nothing to persuade him that I still have a job to do on the earth plane, that I'm invaluable to him in every conceivable way. God, you need me. Brides need me. They need my sagacious advice and instruction. My mother needs me. My husband needs me. I know a lot about weddings. Invaluable stuff, God. I help the brides on the most challenging days of their lives. Without me, God, they definitely fall apart. Of course, I don't really believe this is true for a moment, but hopefully God will be persuaded by this compelling argument that I have brought to his attention so eloquently. I hope I was persuasive enough. I'm furiously thinking about 101 more reasons why God needs me, when quite suddenly a huge pair of arms thrusts me off the hardened, slick, lubricous, very slippery rock face and throws me over his shoulders. I'm almost crying with relief. I feel as if I can let go finally, release my inhibitions, breathe again, relax. Oh my God, I'm being saved. Maybe God brought into my last lion, hook, line and sinker, I hope, that brides would fall apart without me. That must have been the lion that clinched the deal with God. Thank God for that. The wind wails and screams. Her ugliness intensifies when she sees one of her victims has been spared and rescued, which she was hoping to devour for herself, sacrificing to the ocean waves as a magnanimous gift. But not any more. I've been delivered from her perilous clutches by the merciful grace of a Bigfoot. If you had told me a day earlier that a Bigfoot would rescue me, and the bride from a perilous storm, I would never have believed you, not even for a moment. I would probably think you had overindulged on psychedelic hallucinatory effects of the magic mushrooms that they often talk about. But what is happening to me now, as the creature holds me down with his overlarge hands, is real. Very real, and I'm not making any of this up, as surreal as this may seem to anyone listening to my story. Indeed, every aspect of this night has been dappled with a surreal, aura and ambience from the rising tempestuous storm, the cowering guests, the murdered red velvet cake, and the rescuing of me and the bride. If I live through this night, I will confess this is indeed quite some story, a story I shall never forget. Will it change my life? I'm yet to see. I hope it will change me in a good and positive way. We could all do with being chiselled and shaped into becoming better people, the best of what we were preordained to be, a better version of ourselves. The Bigfoot smells magnificent, of sea salt, earth, and of pine. His glistening coat is wet from the damp sea, but as his long hair begins to dry, it bounces up in silken waves. The wind beats against his body, but the Bigfoot doesn't flinch. Like a powerful Californian redwood tree, he resolutely stands his ground, refusing to pander to the childish moaning whims of the wind. It would seem nothing can get this stoic, majestical, powerful creature down. Not for a moment. But then standing up at 9 foot tall and easily over 800 pounds, this creature cannot be trifled with. It is with effortless ease he glides directly towards the Georgian property that is not only my wedding venue, but also my home. And as we draw ever closer, my heart warms considerably. It's the same feeling you get when you've been away from home for a very long time, and you return realizing that no matter how great your holiday was, at the end of the day, there really is no place like home. It was a very familiar, joyous feeling that aligned the back of my eyes with the dew of my own tears. I know I've only been away from the property for hours, but it feels more like months, weeks, even years. In the dusky twilight, my Georgian mansion looks like a dark cardboard cutout. The Bigfoot presses his sturdy foot against the ornate white front door, with its gleaming gold knocker, and swings it open with a push. The door slams behind him with a loud bang caused by the wind, as he finally enters the passageway. I say nothing as the Bigfoot head swings to the left and right, as he negotiates his way through the house, and then he places me on a sofa in the living room, opposite the sleeping form of the bride lying across the other sofa. She's in a deep sleep. Her snores echo across the high ceilings of my home. I notice the Bigfoot has not only covered her body with a throw, but with a plethora of scatter cushions as well, to keep her lovely and warm, because there is now a pronounced chill in the air. And then he quickly glances around the room with wide eyes, scanning the furnished landscape. Then he finds another loose throw, scattered over a recliner, which he covers me with a velvety blanket, along with a plethora of scatter cushions he finds lying around. I feel so much warmer. The relief of being away from the biting wind is immense. There are no words to express my gratitude. He grunts at me, saying something to me in a very strange, enigmatic language that sounds like Umana sulunuto boyanda bulawanao. The yellow eyes of his human-like face glance down at me, and they meet mine. No words come out of my mouth in exchange, for I am truly spent, completely exhausted and debilitated by the challenging duties the night offloaded on me, that I did not willingly undertake, but I did them anyway. "Thank you," I whispered to him in my mind. "Thank you for saving me." By the reaction in his eyes, I know he has heard my thanks. I swear he smiles at me, as the corner of his lips twitch upwards, and his yellow eyes are bespeckled with merriment. I hear the words in my head. "You were meant to be saved. A good apple should always be rescued, and not left for the pigs to eat. I'm glad I could help." He turned around and glided through the house, and the bang of the front door could be heard slamming behind him. In a trice I drifted off to a deep sleep, and it was only in the morning that both me and the bride were awoken to crowds of jubilant wedding guests gathering around us in delight, crying out jubilantly, "They're alive! They're alive! Oh my God, they're alive!" My husband and the groom were naturally overjoyed to find us alive. They had feared the very worst. There is a happy celebratory atmosphere among everyone as the storm died down in the early hours of the morning. During that terrifying, bleak ordeal, the guests had gathered together, under the tables, entertaining each other with stories all night that lightened the mood and lifted people's spirits. As one of the guests was to say, "The wedding night changed my life, made me aware of my own mortality." It would seem that wedding night changed the lives of so many, People gave up jobs they loathed. Unmarried people sought meaningful relationships. And even the bride herself, who had abandoned 2 marriages at the speed of light, settled down to her marriage very happily with her husband. And as far as I know, she's still very happily married to the same man. I asked her if she remembered her rescue from the water. All she could say was that a great big angel with big, yellow, beautiful eyes rescued her that night. As for me, not even my husband knows about my rescuer, or rescue, at the hands of a Bigfoot. I don't know how to explain this to you, but some things in your life are so deeply intimate, almost like something that you would only share with God himself. This is one of those experiences for me. So you may ask why I'm sharing it with you in this anonymous forum, because only good can come from my sharing, and I want you to know there are angels living among us, and many of them are of the hairy kind. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.